Okay, before we start tonight's video, here's a quick little word on the still image I'm using. As some of you guys know, I used to be a semi-pro actor. It's not really something I do much anymore. And you know, as a consequence of that, I've worked with a lot of celebrities. I could name drop all day, and that would take up the whole video, so I won't. But you know, off the top of my head, Woody Harrelson, CCH Pounder, Rosario Dawson, Seth Rogen, Zach Galifianakis, Matthew McConaughey. I was actually a personal friend of Jason Carter from Babylon 5, the guy who plays Marcus Cole. Even though I've never actually seen one episode of Babylon 5, and Jason knew that. But me and that guy used to hang out. He's a laugh riot in real life. That guy is just really cool. We used to smoke weed together in the back of his van. We worked together as characters at a haunted house in New Orleans called the Mortuary. Now, I don't actually have pictures of myself with any of those people because, quite frankly, they were just coworkers to me, and then I didn't really get all starstruck over them or anything like that. But when I portrayed a murder victim by the name of Todd Foley in Season 1, Episode 18, entitled The List of NCS New Orleans, I got a chance to meet Scott Bakula. And, you know, one thing that you guys may or may not know about the Fakesagan is that I am a huge Star Trek fan. I fucking love Star Trek. And I loved Enterprise. And I also used to watch Quantum Leap back in the day. So getting a chance to meet Captain Archer, I acted like a starstruck fool. I was like, can we take a picture? And he's like, sure, man, yeah, let's take a picture together. But by the way, you know, anybody who's wondering what he's like in real life, totally cool, totally nice guy, really friendly, really funny, really smart. You know, all those people that I just mentioned are really cool in real life. The only celebrity I ever worked with who was a dick was Sylvester Stallone, if anybody wants to know. I worked with him on a couple of films. One of them was Grudge Match with De Niro. The other one was Escape Plan with Arnold Schwarzenegger. And, you know, I remember one time on the set of Escape Plan. It was a prison scene. I was one of the prisoners in one of the cells, and we basically had a soundstage set up in the middle of like this big airplane hangar type Quonset hut sort of thing. And so there was a rule on set that you're not allowed to smoke. I mean, most sets you're not allowed to smoke on set. You got to step out by the craft services tent and fucking do it outside or whatever. And so what was going on is that I and a bunch of other people, including the director Michael Hafstrom, were outside of the soundstage, and like a bunch of acrid smoke starts coming out of the top of the soundstage, and the director gets on his little bullhorn thing, and he's like, "Reminder: no smoking on set." And Sly comes marching out, all pissed off, with a big stogie in his mouth, like, "Hey, I'm fucking smoking, man. You got a problem with that? I can replace you like that." Hey. Like, he's just a fucking asshole. I mean, he walks around with his bodyguards all the time. He won't really interact with anybody, and he like eats lunch in his own trailer and stuff instead of hanging with everybody else. You know, Tommy from the Bronx draws a lot of comparisons to Sylvester Stallone. Let me say this right now. Tommy, you're no Sly Stallone. And I mean that as a compliment, because you're cool and Sly is a dick. Hey, Fakesagan, can you get in trouble for posting this picture on social media? Not really. I mean, the studio could sue me if they really thought it was worth their time, but I don't have any money anyway, and fucking, I mean, the worst they could really do is like DMCA this video, which would probably be successful, but quite honestly, I don't think anybody gives a fuck. So the worst they could really do is like blacklist me, and I don't give a fuck because I don't really do that stuff anymore for work. And freaking Scott is cool, so I know he's not gonna care. Now anyway, the topic of today's video is the lack of respect in society, and things that just kind of piss me off, and how I get myself in trouble by losing my temper and stuff like that. So in order to give the proper context to this video, I've got to talk a little bit about my childhood and my upbringing. And I'm going to refer to a comment that I left on my video about my estranged daughter entitled Her. Because I know not everybody reads comments, so some people might have missed this one. Now, the comment is so overly long that I couldn't screen cap the other comment that I was replying to, which is by a user named The Portuguese. And he actually left some great comments. I mean, that's the reason why he got such a response. So, if you want to read the whole thing, go over to that video entitled Her, and it's all there. But without further ado, I'm going to read this comment. I said, I never met my father either, but he bowed out of my life for different reasons. He was a cokehead womanizer and just didn't want the responsibility. In my case, I actually crave responsibility of all sorts and seek it out time and again throughout my life, but nobody will ever bestow it upon me because I'm universally perceived as a fuck-up who can't be trusted with it. Oh, the irony. My mom is a genius type with degrees in art and history, and she had to abandon any hope of a career and move back in with her own parents to raise me. My maternal grands were strict Irish Roman Catholics, and I grew up watching my granddad get drunk and call my mom a whore and me an illegitimate bastard child. Even as a little kid, I was philosophically minded enough to question what that meant, illegitimate, as if I were a counterfeit human being or something. Naturally, I blamed religion for this instead of just accepting that my grandfather was a bit of an asshole. My grandfather was a former Catholic monk and hard-bitten World War II Army staff sergeant with pools of Axis blood on his hands. The company he led was the first to cross the Ludendorff Bridge over the Rhine River in Remagen, and that battle is credited by some historians as having shortened the war. He had a penchant for single combat kills with melee weapons. The guys in his company called him the minister, and nobody under his command dared to take the Lord's name in vain. But he was also a high-minded philosopher type and influenced my thought greatly. Of course, my mom, being a woman with needs, tried to have relationships with other men, but my existence always got in the way. My stepdads had a tendency to abuse me, just like my granddad did. Until one day in my preteen years, something inside of me just snapped, and I beat one of them, a man more than twice my size, nearly to death, and left him a bloody, semi-conscious wreck. That was when my own violence began, and I haven't been able to quell it since. I get into bar fights, physical disputes with coworkers, etc. My mom finally met a decent, honorable man and got married, and I developed a mutual respect with him, but I did kick his ass once just for good measure. You have to earn the right to fuck my mother, and that doesn't come cheap. When I was about 18 or 19 years old, I did some detective work and tracked my father down through my paternal grandparents. They gave me his contact info. I spoke to him on the phone and started building a rapport. But he was so glib and nonchalant about the fact that he was never there for me that I quickly grew resentful and basically told him to go fuck himself. Then I lost contact with him and haven't tried to reestablish it since. The worst part was I found out that he had a new family, and when he sent me pictures and I saw my half-brother for the first time, my half-bro looked eerily similar to me. He was like a doppelganger, so yes, there is a bizarro Fakesagan out there. The funny thing is, I would actually much rather connect with my half-bro than with my douchebag pops. And in case anyone's wondering, my dad was a professional radio DJ. I shit you not. Thanks for your comment and sharing your own story. Okay, so what's this battle that I'm making reference to? The Battle of Remagen. It's referred to by some historians as the Miracle at Remagen. What happened is the 9th Armored Division of the U.S. Army captured the Siegfried Line, and they started advancing toward the Rhine River. And the Germans did everything they could to try to stop the Allied advance, and they started wiring bridges with explosives and blowing them up. But the explosives failed to detonate on one of these bridges called the Ludendorff Bridge. And basically, my grandpops was like, "Let's go, boys!" And they all stormed across. And interestingly enough, the Reich Chancellor Adolf Hitler himself got involved in this and ordered V-2 rockets to be fired to destroy the bridge. It resulted in the largest anti-aircraft artillery battle in United States history. The Germans threw everything they could at this bridge to just try to stop the advance. They were using the Luftwaffe to just bomb and strafe the shit out of it. But it didn't work. You guys all know the outcome of the war. Now, I talked about my grandfather being a monk. He was a Catholic monk. He was a Christian brother monk in a monastery when World War II broke out. And he decided that he had to leave the Brotherhood because he had a moral obligation to fight the war. A lot of this probably comes from the fact that Hitler's first move was invading Poland, and Poland is a Catholic country. So he went to the abbot of the monastery and he requested permission to be released from his vows to join the army and go fight the war. And the abbot told him, I want you to understand the gravity of your decision. You can't just go fight a war and then expect to come back into the fold. If you do this, then you leave permanently and you're not going to be welcomed back. And he accepted that, and he went and fought the war. I also mentioned a penchant for melee weapons. Knowing my grandfather the way I did, we Andersons are kind of all or nothing people. So I have to assume that his reasoning was something like, if I'm going to break God's law and damn my soul to hell, then I might as well do it in style. Now, of course, he used the standard weapons that the Army was using at the time, the M1 Garand rifle, the Thompson, the 1911 sidearm, all that stuff. But he liked to fight with a combat knife, and he liked to fight with a hatchet. My grandfather didn't like telling war stories. You couldn't really pry too many details out of him when he was sober. But when he got drunk, due to his guilty conscience, which was quite often, he would tell hair-raising stories about severing people's spinal columns with that hatchet, and he would have nightmares, wake up screaming in the middle of the night, trying to strangle my grandmother because he thought she was a Nazi. He would occasionally say some pretty wild stuff like, never trust a Jap until his head is 10 feet away from his body. Now, when I talk about him having been a high-minded philosopher type, what is that about? He really had some interesting philosophical pronouncements that he would make pretty frequently. One of his fondest sayings was, "We all have it within ourselves to be angels or to be demons." He kind of prefigured Noam Chomsky's statement that each one of us can be a gas chamber attendant or a saint with that one. There's a story that my mom told me about from the height of the Red Scare during the Cold War. I guess this would have been the 60s, mid to early 60s at some point, where my mom, a little girl at the time, was sitting around the dinner table with my uncles, who were also little kids at the time. And my grandmother had dinner set on the table. And my grandfather comes home, reaches into his overcoat, and pulls out a communist newspaper and just plunks it down on the middle of the table. And to hear my mother describe it, my grandmother shrieked like he had just thrown a dead rat on the table. Because there was a lot of persecution of communists going on in the U.S. at the time. And my grandfather was anything but a communist. He despised the communists. But when my grandmother said, how dare you bring that into this house? His response was, we shouldn't be afraid of ideas. And then he encouraged my mom and my uncles to peruse that newspaper, which, according to her, they did. In case anybody thinks I'm making this stuff up, which of course you do, here's a copy of his discharge papers, which is actually the only thing I have left of him. He left all of his... well, I shouldn't say left. While he was still alive, he gave all of his medals to me, including his Bronze Star. And he also gave me this really cool pair of Nazi binoculars that he took off the body of a guy he killed. But all that stuff was destroyed in a fire when I was a kid. A fire that I rescued him from, actually. I had to drag his unconscious body out of the house. He also brought back a genuine... samurai katana from the war that he took from... I can't remember exactly how he got that katana or how he came by that. He never told that story, but we don't have that anymore either. What happened is my Uncle Joe, same name as my grandfather, he was kind of a wild man like me. He's dead now. He's the one who taught me how to play guitar. He died of cancer from his years of drinking and smoking. And anyway, one night he got into an argument with a neighbor, and he was drunk. And he took the katana outside and cut the wheel of this guy's car in half with it. From what I've been told, the blade actually went through the rim of the wheel of the car and cut the wheel clean in half, tire, brake, everything. And, naturally the police showed up and they confiscated the sword. So where that is today, I have no idea, and I'm sure there's a Japanese family somewhere that's dying to get it back. What would Grandpa Joe have thought about the fact that I was an atheist? Well, he would have been scandalized, which is why I never revealed that to him while he was still alive. It isn't so much that I was afraid of what he would do if I told him, although I'm sure that was part of it, but it was more that I didn't want to break his heart. What would he have thought about the fact that I've abandoned the family's faith, Roman Catholicism, in favor of Eastern Orthodoxy? Well, I asked my mother about that, and she says that in her opinion he would have been cool with it because... from what she knows, he had a great deal of respect for the Orthodox, even though he wasn't one himself. Why am I talking about all this stuff in this video? Why is this important context to have in order to understand the points that I'm going to make and the things I'm going to say about myself? Well, what it comes down to is the fact that I'm kind of a relic living in a time warp. Because I was raised by the greatest generation. I was raised by the World War II generation, my grandfather and my grandmother. And they instilled values in me that really have no place in the world that we live in today. What tends to get me into trouble is the fact that I have a habit of going around trying to enforce those values. And I have triggers. That's what it really comes down to. There's a lot of things that just set me off. Let me give you one example. Men not opening the car door for a woman. That just sets me the fuck off. I grew up watching my grandfather open the car door for my grandmother every time we went somewhere as a family. I don't even think my grandmother knew how to open a car door herself. And if for whatever reason, not that it happened very often, my grandfather didn't walk around and open the passenger side door, she just didn't get in the car. Now, so here's an example of what I'm talking about. A couple living situations back, I had a landlord, right? affluent, middle-class guy, kind of preppy. So you would expect him to be a respectful guy and a classy guy. Well, he was one half of a young couple. He had a wife, and she was carrying his child. And one time, he had come by the apartment to visit, and I was friendly with my landlord, so we were hanging out, stuff like that. And they get ready to go leave, and I see them out, and he goes to the car, opens the driver's side door, and gets in. And his pregnant wife has to go around to the passenger side and open her own door and get in. You know, oh, you son of a bitch, you. Look, I open the passenger side door for my girlfriend. I always walk around, I open the door, and, not only do I open the door, but when she gets in, I buckle the seatbelt for her, and then I close the door. And we weren't even married. I mean, we didn't, she wasn't even carrying my child. So seeing this guy, at the time, letting his pregnant wife do that for herself, it set me off. And after that, I never talked to him again. I just started giving this guy the cold shoulder, and he didn't understand why. Here's another example of what I'm talking about. A couple years ago, I was working at this bowling alley, right? And one of my coworkers, this guy named Steve, he was an older gentleman, not the most intelligent guy in the world, but really kind, really nice, really sweet guy. And it was the end of the night, and he and another coworker and I, we were closing the place down. The last groups of people that were there were paying their bill and getting ready to leave. And one of them was this younger fellow, about 16, maybe 17 years old. He was kind of a he was kind of one of these wigger types, one of these yos. Had the flat brimmed cap, and he thought he was all cool, sort of doing the Paul's ego vibe, what it do. And he had a couple girls with him and stuff, and he was I saw him talking to Steve, and I was standing within earshot, and more importantly within arm shot. And this kid, when he's saying his goodbyes to Steve, he kind of does one of those like, "Thanks for your hard work, Chief," kind of things, and gives him the little alpha male shoulder pat. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? This douchebaggy, condescending shoulder pat. Not like he hit him hard or anything, just that kind of like, "Thanks, broham. Way to go, boss." That kind of condescending sort of thing. The way I was raised, respect for elders is paramount. It's just like you just don't break it. And when I saw this kid do this, and Steve, and the thing is, Steve didn't give a shit. He was just like, "Oh yeah, anytime, yeah, you got it, man." Well, he didn't say man, but anyway, in that moment, I just had this flash of rage. And it like, have you ever been so angry that your ears actually start ringing like you just walked out of a metal concert and you weren't wearing earplugs? It was like that, and I got so pissed that I just gave him like a brutal attitude adjustment right in the face and knocked his ass out cold. I was just pow right in the fucking face. So yeah, I lost the job and assault charges and all that good stuff. Now, is that incident of violence a example of projection, psychological projection? Absolutely. Because in a situation like that, where my mind goes is I think about what my grandfather would have said if I had been the one disrespecting an elder in front of him, and what would have happened to me in that case. And it's almost like I can hear his voice in my head, and I sort of assume the role of him in that situation, and I become him. So here's another example, and this one's a bit more recent. This is only a year old. It occurred in Metairie, which is basically a suburb of New Orleans. It's actually a separate township, but it's part of New Orleans. The Amazing Atheist is going to know what I'm talking about. It was in Metairie. I was at a bar with a buddy of mine, and this guy was a former Marine. If you ask a Marine, they'll say there's no such thing. Once a Marine, always a Marine. By the way, let me interject here. Most of my friends in real life tend to be military folks, even though I never served. Why is that? I don't know, but it's not just that I gravitate towards them. They gravitate towards me. It's like military folks just seem to like me. I seem to like them. They tend to be the people I get along the best with. Well, anyway, this guy, about my same age, a little bit older, definitely a lot bigger, 200 pounds, all muscle. And we were sitting down at the bar having some drinks, too many drinks. And, he struck up a conversation with a girl on the other end of the bar. A woman, I shouldn't say girl. I mean, she was, same age and everything. And he started being disrespectful. He started, he was hitting on her and it didn't go well, so he started kind of doing the slut-shaming thing, saying things that I didn't think he should have. And, push came to shove. We ended up stepping outside. He landed a punch on my jaw, square on the chin, that I swear literally lifted me off I felt my feet come off the ground, and I hit the deck. But I got back up, rushed at him. I kind of did like a Goldberg spear, if you guys know what that is. I kind of, crouched low and shoulder checked him in the midsection, and when I had him down on the ground, I just proceeded to rearrange his face. No charges resulted from that because he wasn't the cop calling type, or the charge pressing type. But needless to say, the friendship was over after that. Is that another case of psychological projection? Absolutely. I've treated women like shit plenty of times. You guys already know about that. And now let's move on to the most recent example of all, and one that you guys don't have to take my word for. The live chat session with Brett Keane and Jesus Freak, where they started talking about Catholicism and Eastern Orthodoxy being forms of idolatry for venerating the saints and the Virgin Mary. Let me cross myself here. Straight up triggered, straight up led to a rage quit. And absolutely, this is an outgrowth of the same thing. Was there projection involved in that one? Sure. I mean, you guys know that I was an atheist and a very outspoken and vitriolic one for quite a long time. So there was probably an element of that involved, but. The point that I'm making and the point of this video is there are things that set me off, and there are things that the average American citizen living in 2016 would never see coming, they would never predict. People do this stuff not realizing it's going to set me off, and it does. Big time. A lot of people left comments on the video about my daughter saying that they think I'm shirking responsibility and that I am just too selfish or lazy or irresponsible to be a parent or to want to be a parent. And that isn't what it is. I actually, like I said, I crave responsibility. The reason why I won't allow myself to be a part of my daughter's life is that this seed of violence has been planted within me that I can't seem to extract. And as I've mentioned, I've tried prayer and therapy and every other means I can devise to try to change, but I just can't. And I know that my daughter, as wonderful of a little girl as she is a modern little girl with modern values, and I'm too afraid that something would happen, that she would say or do something that would cause me to physically abuse her, the way I was physically abused as a kid myself. So that is all the news fit to print for this little video right here. Keep it fake.